Welcome to today's show of Cluster Zero. Last week, our host went to the University of Winnipeg to take nature science profiles. Today, we're going to be looking at the results and comparing them to the teaching philosophies.
My results, most of them were pretty close to the middle, sort of just neutral. The two that I had the biggest sway in would be relativism. I was a -9 towards that, which I really think actually represents my ideas. So one of the statements was judgments as to the truth of scientific theories will vary from individual to individual, from one culture to another. And I really think that's true, that learning is kind of an individual thing and that everybody's going to get something different out of it. So I thought that was pretty accurate for me. And the other big one was contextualism. I was a +13 towards it. So the view that the truth of scientific knowledge and process is independent with culture in which the scientist lives and in which it takes place. So that to me just made so much sense, and I think it's a really true statement. I think that it's sort of similar to the other one, that who you are as a person and what you are interested in affects what it is that you're learning about and your experiences with that subject matter. So I thought that was pretty accurate.
I think it's so different. My results are the total opposite of the board from you and very opposite. I was very high on the positivism and on the decon. And I think that really suits my teaching style and how I do things. The one I thought was super interesting on my results was the deductivism. I think that's very much my style. I'm all about testing the limit, pushing it as far as you can go. And I think if I see a previous theory, I don't just believe and go, okay. I try to test that theory, tweak it, make it something big, get newer results. And I think that's so true because science is never done, and it's an imaginative mind that's going to keep discovering new things in science rather than just going with what we've learned through history. So I think that's super me. And I also think I scored pretty high on realism, and I think that science is independent from scientists, because scientists are there to explore, but they're not creating new things. They're finding things and testing and finding results. So they're doing more inquiry work and testing about the natural truth, but they're not manipulating it. And I think that's very much why I scored so high as a realism at a +10, because without scientists, it would simply go unsolved, but not unchanged.
Okay, so I find it real interesting that you and I have the same results to realism, because kind of going back to scientific facts and scientists, without scientists we wouldn't be able to put things to test and to find out what's actually happening to get these scientific facts.
Yeah. And I know both of you were realism, and I got closer to instrumentalism. I was only a -2, but I wouldn't say I'm more instrumentalism as much as I am just not realism. I don't really agree with that. I think that it's back to what I said before, in that our ideas and our worlds shape our theories, and so I get that the science that we have is because of the specific scientist, and that science is static and it doesn't necessarily change, but our perception of it in a sense does. So I think that way back when, science was a lot different and the theories were all different, and I guess even though some of them were incorrect, the science changes and it develops and it is different over time. So.
And I think that's a great thing about this table, is we all have different perspectives, but we can all bring it together for this common goal of science. Just one last one I want to touch on is the process-driven and content-driven. I'm just curious about your guys' scores. I scored a -13, very process-driven, and I'm not sure about you guys, where do you fall on that aspect, but I think that's something so great to talk about. What were your scores?
I was +2 towards content-driven, so okay. A little bit different than you. What about you, Cynthia?
I was kind of in the middle, closer a little bit more on the negative side, but I would say fairly close to the middle.
Okay, I just think it's so important because I'm very process driven, because science is not the facts. Science is more like how you get the facts, and I think if you know the process, then you can find out so much more knowledge rather than focusing on the knowledge and the content and having to memorize all that stuff. If you know the process, you know how you can discover more things. And I think it's just so much more about science, and it can further your knowledge later, but it's very great for independent inquiry.
I agree with that to some degree, but I think it depends on the age group a little bit. With younger years, I would focus so much more on process and a little bit on content, just sort of like the basic ideas, like all the clusters for the younger grades are fairly like general and basic. Whereas the older grades, I think that them learning that content and actually understanding like what it is that makes our world work is more important than the process, which hopefully they have gotten a fairly good grasp on in the younger stages. What do you think?
Those are some pretty good views.
I just think process, like, they have to know the process before they can know the content. Because if you just drill them with content without going to process, it's not going to make sense to them. They're just going to have all these facts, but they're not going to have any like background knowledge of how it came from or how to solve it on their own. And it's all about inquiry. So I think that like process is always needed. Yeah.
We're going to keep talking about this, but while we do, we want you to get involved in the discussion. Tweet us at Cluster Zero so we can hear all your opinions, ideas, and questions, and we'll make sure that we respond to you. Welcome back, everybody. We are now going to turn our attention to your guys' tweets and see what everyone has to say. So our first tweet is from D. Sutherland. And it says, scientific knowledge is different from other kinds of knowledge in that it has a higher status. What do you guys think?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that like scientific knowledge can be coined as a higher status, because I think if I was to answer this question, I would have a really hard time, and I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but we can't credit science for everything. I mean, there's other beliefs out there, so do I agree or disagree? I don't really know where I stand at that point. I feel like maybe I would kind of be in the middle.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if someone has a spiritual power or spiritual knowledge or belief, then who's to say that that's not higher status than scientific knowledge?
So would you say it's more like circumstantial to different theories, or would you just say like blanket across the board, you don't have an opinion?
I would say that scientific knowledge does have higher status in the context. So for, let's say, medical research or surgeries, etc., like, you know, saving someone's life, whatever it takes, like, I think that situation, scientific knowledge does have higher power.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay, so we've got another one here. It's from Mrs. Fuzzy Boots, and it says, the most valuable part of science education is what remains after the facts have been forgotten. Interesting.
Oh, this is totally mine. Like, I think, just what I was saying earlier about being like process driven, you know? When I look back on my science education and everything I did in like school, I don't remember the lifespan of an owl or like the oxygen count and all that stuff. All I remember is how I could find that information. You know, like it's like the ways to find the information rather than all of like the facts. My brain just simply can't control that. Like it can't hold all that information, but I remember how to do inquiry and how to do research and how to test things and come up with predictions and ideas and observations and all those things. So I think it's so important to be like process driven and not worry about the facts, but about the process and how. Science is all about the how and not as like how to find the answer, and that's I think much more important. And I don't think it's about the whys until you focus on the hows, and it's all about skills and inquiry, and that's kind of something that I would really want to bring into my classroom is make my students very curious and
So
set them
important.
up with the means and the tools to find their own answers rather than giving them the answers without them having an opportunity to like test it and stuff, because that's what they're going to carry on like out of their like to their next grade and also to their new schools and just out into their lives. Like they'll always be knowing how to do things rather than having to think back and remember the facts on what that is. So I think that's very important. I think I agree with her on that.
Okay. We have one more here, again from D. Sutherland, a little Twitter fiend, it seems. So it says, human emotion plays no part in the creation of scientific knowledge. I really disagree with that one. It's sort of, it was reflected in my science profile. I think that human emotion plays a very big part in the creation of scientific knowledge, in the sense that like people research and look into the things that they are interested in and the things that mean something to them. So for example, there's been so much cancer research in the last few years, and I think that it's because it's something that affects so many people. So it's a field of scientific knowledge that gets a larger portion of people's attention, and therefore more knowledge is being created on it. And it's really like it's all like based on what matters to you and like what affects you, and that leads you to create and research and find more information on a particular subject. So, yeah.
I see one more tweet here from Dee Sutherland, but we don't have time for that. We'll have to get her on the show next time. She seems to be such a big fan. But thanks
Lots
for
to
the
say.
tweets, guys, and we always look forward to answering you guys and addressing you guys on the show. That's what makes it fun here on Class 2-0.